Hello, everyone. Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Ron. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Eon. And with me, I have CJ.
Hi, CJ Keefe. I'm the Director of Infrastructure, DevOps, and SRE for SoFi.
Great. So today, we're going to talk about cloud infrastructure backup. And I think that it's going to be a different point of view on what backups can really do for you. So I will start, and then CJ will tell us how SoFi leveraged Eon to get more out of their backups. So let's start by just letting you know what Eon is. So Eon is a cloud infrastructure backup company. We've founded the company 2 years ago, and Eon is one of the most fastest growing companies in that space of cloud infrastructure and cybersecurity ever. And that might sound a bit surprising. How can something as mundane as backup can drive such hypergrowth? And I think that this is going to be very interesting today because our mission is to unlock the true potential of backups. And the true potential of backups, which until today were kind of useless insurance policies in some way that we really had to store. We had to have backups for everything because we might need to recover data, obviously, but compliance also mandates that. But we didn't get a lot of value out of that. And cloud infrastructure backups accrue between 10 and 30% of your cloud bill. So that didn't make sense for us. We said, how can we have so much spend in the cloud that doesn't generate enough value? And not surprisingly, everything starts with AI and with these unbelievable advancements that we've seen over the past years and this technology that actually changes every aspect of our lives these days. And when we have such a disruptive technology, it always introduces opportunity, obviously, but also confusion, noise, fear, et cetera. So what does backup have to do with AI? That is something which is not as intuitive as we would think. And let's see what. So if we would look at AI, and what AI basically means today, is that it requires, as all new technologies, infrastructure and applications. So we have great applications that leverage AI today, so many. And we have these amazing things, those foundational models, those LLMs that do generative AI and bring so much value to organizations. And then the classic infrastructure, compute, obviously, databases, and so on. And then there's something very unique and interesting with AI. It's data. Basically, AI takes data and makes it the enterprise's invaluable asset, so almost your currency. So in a space where data is so precious and is such an asset, that basically means that we need access to our data, and we need our data. So let's imagine that we could go back in time and talk to ourselves a couple of years back and tell them that this is what is going to happen. Your data is going to be your most valuable asset. Then obviously we would start to store the data, hoard the data, and leverage that. But that's really interesting because if we look at your data today, you actually do have that data, that historical data, in your backups. But your backed up data today is pretty much useless because you can't read the data. You can't access the data, so you can't leverage it for AI. And that's where Eon transformed this market completely, and that's what drove this hypergrowth that we've had in customer adoption. So we'll talk about that. But before we talk about that, let's just talk about what is backup actually in the cloud. Because we were used to, for someone like me that have been operating in that space for close to 20 years, backups were tapes, were boxes that we put in data centers and took snapshots of whatever you had in your data center. But in the cloud, backups basically are in the form of either versioning and replication of object storage and the storage services, or cloud-native snapshots. Your databases, managed or unmanaged, SQL database, relational databases, or NoSQL, like your DynamoDBs, et cetera. And these are the actual forms of backup, but there are all of them stored honestly, if we're talking about AWS, but you can't access the data. If I have an RDS snapshot or an EBS snapshot, for example, and I want to access the data that is backed up in that RDS snapshot, I need to do a full-blown restoration into a different location. And only then can I access the data. And we'll talk about why is that so challenging and why doesn't it make any sense for you to pay such a huge chunk of your cloud bill and can't, for storage, that you pay per gig per month, but can't access the data. So we'll talk about how Eon completely transforms that. But before we do that, and we'll obviously see how SoFi leveraged that with Eon as well. But before we do that, let's start with a problem, the problem description. Why are backups broken in the cloud today? What are the challenges that we've been seeing customers face in that space? And we've seen that over the years. Before co-founding Eon, I was the general manager for the migration and disaster recovery services at AWS. And we've seen from up close why customers are struggling with their cloud infrastructure backup, both in managing it, orchestrating backups, but primarily when they do need access to that backed up storage, what can they do and why is it so hard? So there's very limited visibility. We've seen advancements in the space of cloud security and performance monitoring and so on that didn't apply for backups. It's very hard to manage backup policies, to know if you're backing up what you actually need for the right amount of time in the right locations, and are you paying for what you actually need, or are you exposing yourself to risk? If you have friction when you need to pass a compliance audit and you need to prove that you're backing up data, how can you access that data? How can you show that you're backing up your data as you should have, both on the reporting side, but also with generating evidence? The process today of generating evidence that you're backing up your data properly requires you to do a full-blown restoration of the entire thing. Think of a large DynamoDB table with billions of items. In order to access one backed up item, you need to recover the entire billions of them. Pay a lot of money on creating a huge table only to access that single record that you need for your compliance audit. That doesn't make any sense. And basically, it means that your data is inaccessible. So what we've started with that problem, let's solve the problem of recovery. Because on the other end, there was another space that did amazing advancements over the past few years, and that's the data management space, where companies like Databricks and Snowflake and the cloud providers have done an amazing job in storing data in data lakes in a format that is readable, that can be used by any engine, such as Athena in AWS. And our thought was, let's take backup and use that piece of technology, use that format in order to store the backed up data, which is still immutable, still object lock, still air-gapped. So it's a full-blown read-only backup across points in time, but it is accessible. So I can run SQL queries directly on top of my backup, and I will show you that in the demo. And while we are accessing the data for the purposes of recovery, that basically allows us to use it for AI, for analytics, for a lot of other things. And that data that we've been storing for that period of time is now a valuable asset, and that can be a huge win for all of us. And then there's cost. And cost is rising when we look at cloud infrastructure backup. It's extremely ineffective in the way that it is stored. And the reason, and we'll talk about that in depth today, is that the technology that is used to storing backups, which is basically incremental storage. Every day, your data changes. Some percentage of it changes, not all of it. So we need to store every day only what have changed, those deltas. But that's a very, very complex thing to do. And all of the technology was invented for data centers. All of the vendors out there that are doing cloud infrastructure backup took their technology from on-prem and tried to apply it to the cloud. But the cloud is different. It's different because storing data in the object storage is not bound to a single disk. It is scalable. And doing and APIs cost money because it's a distributed control plane. So reading and writing, when you're doing that incremental changes and deduplication algorithms, accrue a lot of cost of APIs. And that's what we've solved with Eon as well. And then there is ransomware risk and in data protection. And we're seeing today that there's a huge gap in ransomware detection, specifically in the cloud, and definitely when we're referring to managed databases that can be encrypted in the application layer. And we'll see how Eon solved that as well. So a little bit about Eon. First of all, as I've said, Eon provides live data access to backups. And that's extremely important for various reasons. First of all, as we've said, simplify the recovery piece. When I need to recover data, I don't want that old operating system which is coupled with the data. Let's say that I want to run a simple SQL query on a snapshot from a year ago. Today, before Eon, I would have, and let's assume that that was running on a Postgre database on a VM, on an EC2. I would have to recover the entire EC2 instance. Now think about it. It brings old operating system, a year old, packed with security vulnerabilities. It will pull from the past that old Postgres software, which is potentially end of life. And I'll need the DBA to upgrade it. It needs to live in a network that potentially does not exist anymore. And it consumes resources and accrue cost. It needs to run full-blown compute. I only want to fetch one record, and I need to restore potentially terabytes of data. With Eon, we provide live access to the backup, and we'll show you how. We want to reduce the total cost of ownership, and that ties back to AI. AI accrues a lot of cost for compute. If there are inefficiencies in the way that you're storing your backups, and you're spending such a large chunk of your cloud bill on that, we want to free up that budget, either for you to be more efficient, or to move that to things that bring you value, and to use that, once again, for AI. Eon does full ransomware resilience for all of the services, including managed and unmanaged databases, VMs, file services, and I'll show you how, and just doing automation around backup management. So how can I access my data from my backups? We've just said that the backup is holding all of the data and the historical data as well. And I want to leverage that in order to gain all of that value. So Eon transforms your cloud backup to a live data lake. So if you would look at the bottom section of this slide, you will see that Eon, in order to, even before we go into backups, what is a data lake? So a data lake basically is a lot of data that is stored on object storage usually, let's say on S3, in a format which is readable. Avro or Parquet files are the most popular file formats. But in order to ingest data into the data lake, you need to extract it from all of the different cloud resources, your ETLs. And that is extremely disruptive, especially for enterprises. Because think about it, you need to access each production database. You need to know what's in there. And you need to build an engineering project that actually fetches the data. Eon has a different approach. We're backing up the data anyway. So we're accessing the data anyway, without accessing the production, without impacting the production. But when we're backing up the data, we're extracting the tabular data, the data from databases, file systems, indexing them completely, and then storing them in object storage, in whatever cloud that you choose. So now you had a zero ETL data lake. Data from all of your backups is transformed, including converting your old snapshots into that layer. And then once you have all of the data stored in a more efficient way, you'll see cost cut down by at least 50%. And now you can leverage that data as well, and we expose it via public interfaces. So beyond Eon's API, you can just access it using simple object storage APIs. And we also add catalogs around it. So the next piece of a data lake is trying to understand what do I have in that data. Now it helps me to recover data, because now if someone, a compliance auditor, asks me to provide the evidence of this and that data, I can just easily do that, because everything is indexed, searchable, queryable. But I can also use analytics and data lakes tools on top of my backups. So things like Amazon Redshift, and Glue, Snowflake, Databricks, every analytics engine that supports data lake format can now be directed directly on top of your backups. And now let's talk about AI. So we've already got to that place where we can extract all of your data from all of your resources, convert it into a readable format that is accessible to those analytics engine. Because a data backup platform needs to process all of your data, 100% of your data, because it backs it up. So every byte that changes, every row in a database that is updated needs to be backed up. We can do light calculations that doesn't add any significant cost at all in the backup process. So once we're backing up the data, we're indexing the data that is backed up in a few ways. The first is trying to understand what's in my data. When I'm backing up a database, for example, I will use a foundational model, an LLM, that is owned by the customer, so we can support any LLM that the customer decides to bring. So for example, let's take Claude via Bedrock as an example. And it generates some textual context on what does that table has for each and every database table that we're backing up. We're taking that data and we're embedding it in a vector database. And that allows us to do RAG on top of the backup. We'll see that in action in a minute. But what it actually means is that now I can search across my backup and I can find the data that I'm after across all of my backups. On top of that, we're doing some calculations such as entropy calculation, which is the primary tool to identify ransomware. And we're doing some algorithms that identify lineage between the different resources. So what can be joinable with what? How can I join data from one resource to another? That is extremely valuable, and we'll see that. So all of that brings a lot of value. And then on the client side, we have a chat interface that allows us to search for data, to generate queries that can run on my data in order to simplify recovery and also gain a lot of data, a lot of insight from my data, generate reports, doing analytics, and so on. So cross-cloud resilience is the next topic, and we'll see that AI in action in a minute. We've all seen outages recently in all cloud providers. And when there's an outage, it's a very interesting phenomena. And being there as the GM for the disaster recovery services, back in 21, when we've seen similar events, we've seen that customers are very reluctant to actually fail over. And the reason is because failing over from one region to another is, first of all, it's a hard problem. It's a hard problem to solve, and it adds a lot of risk. And you're starting with that race. Who will recover first? Will I succeed to recover first to a different region, or will the cloud provider recover before I should even try? And we've seen customers, first of all, sitting and waiting. And throughout the time before they're failing over, they are losing access to their data because their backups, once again, are locked. They can't read data from their backups. So now they're downtime in their primary region, and they can't access their data in the secondary until they will do that full-blown recovery. More than that, if outages take too long, like we've seen right now, 14 hours, customers do give up and try to fail over. And then there is a very interesting phenomena. There are not enough resources in the target region to hold all of that load. So something like US East 1, which is such a popular region, trying to fail over to a different region, and customers are getting iced, insufficient capacity error, which basically means that they can't run compute in that region. And today, data is coupled with that compute. If I have an RDS snapshot, once again, I'll need a VM, an RDS instance that has an EC2 instance under the hood in order to access the data. But with Eon, I can run compute anywhere and access that backed up data. We'll see in action how can we chat with your backup, and a few words about that integration, then we'll just see the product in action. So integrating with Eon is a storage company. We're backing up your data. The data sits in the cloud and is charged in the per gig per month model. We want to make your data your asset, not just for AI, but also for analytics, both for the recovery use cases, but also as a general data lake. And Eon is integrated with as a zero ETL data utility with any data analytics engine that you can that you're probably using. And let's just see the product in action. All right, so this is the Eon console. And in this console, you can first of all start with the first view. And the first view will show you all of the different resources in all of the different cloud providers from all of the regions and all of the service types. And Eon does that in an agentless way. This space of cloud infrastructure backup was not innovated in a long, long time. And using on-prem paradigms of let's take my box for my data center and try to transform it into a virtual appliance that runs in the cloud simply doesn't work. And it doesn't work because the cloud is built differently than an on-prem environment. We have so many resources. They change all the time. Data is moving around from self-hosted databases to managed databases, SQL to NoSQL, and so on. And Eon does all of that in an agentless way. But what's interesting here is that you can see that Eon augments that view and add automatic data classification. So you can see what do you have in your data. And that is very, very important because if I'll zoom in, I can see that we've identified in the actual resource that I have some credit card numbers, so I have financial information in that resource, and that this resource is protected. And the reason that this resource is protected is because you, the customer, have defined in this example a very simple backup policy. Everything in production that has financial information or PII will get this backup policy, a daily backup for 3 months in one region and a monthly for a year in another. And this does not rely on manual tagging. That's the big deal here. It means that if data moves around, the backup policy will stick. If an application team spins up a new application and it's running in production and it has financial information, the backup policy will be applied automatically. So obviously, we support tags, but giving you the ability to define contextual backup policies is making sure that, first of all, you're backing up everything that you need to back up to the right amount of time, meeting your business needs and compliance requirements, but also that you're not over-backing up your data, which can expose some of data as a liability, but also generate costs that you don't want to pay. And now let's talk about data recovery. So this is an interesting example. This is an RDS database. If I want to restore that RDS database, I can select, let's go back, any point in time, hit that restore. And with Eon, because of the fact that we've unlocked the actual format, it's not stored as an RDS snapshot. It is stored as that immutable data lake format. We can restore the entire thing to any cloud provider and any account on the fly. So I can recover between one cloud to another, backup from one cloud to another, and that's huge, especially for events that we need cross-cloud resilience. But what if I'm not after the entire thing? I just want some of the data. I just want to pull a few records. If I want to do that, I can zoom in into our database explorer. And this is the one and only database explorer that runs directly on top of your backups. So let's, once again, select that point in time. Once I hit that, I'm locking the schema to that point in time. And now I can run any SQL query directly on top of my backup. So let's pull a few records. Hit that. And in a second, I have my data. So if I want to pull a few records out of a huge database, I can do that live directly on top of my backup. And think of the alternative. The alternative can take ages and introduce a lot of risk, pulling from the past, once again, that operating system, end-of-life software, and so on. But what if I don't know where my data is? A compliance auditor can come in and ask, hey, for a financial service institution, let's show me that you can provide evidence of all the checks that John Doe wrote a few years back. Or an insurance company, I want to see all of the rejected claims for car insurance and drivers in this and that age, or for the purposes of analytics, but I don't know necessarily where my data is. So we've talked about AI, and we've talked about RAG. Let's see that in action. So with Eon, I can search across all of my backups. So let's do that. Let's search for rejected car insurance claims. So once we do that, this now runs your LLM on top of the RAG, that vector database, in order to search for my relevant data. So it has found the same database that we've fetched those insurance claims earlier on, this RDS backup, but what's more interesting is that it has detected a few other databases. So I can see here a NoSQL database, a MongoDB, self-hosted on EC2, and then spreadsheet that it has found on S3. And what's interesting here is because of the fact that we're, as I said before, we're doing pre-processing of the data. So we identify the lineage and the joinability between the different resources. It has detected here that this UUID column in that insurance policies table correlates in the actual values to that document that it has found in MongoDB, even though it has different names. It actually found that it had the same correlation of data. And that the ID here correlates to that rejection spreadsheet that it has found on your S3 backups. So this is very interesting, and let's generate a query. So let's ask it to build a query, and let's fetch those insurance claims. And let's group the results. So let's see, what do I have here? Some interesting, so I see some age group over here. Let's look at some car category, and let's do that. So the rejected claims, and let's group the results. By driver age and car category and date. Once I do that, this operates our agent that does text to SQL based on that schema. And you see that it has generated a query. I can see the actual query that is generated to run directly on top of my backups to pull that data. But note this, and this is extremely important. This new technology, this amazing AI thing, also introduces a lot of risk. And with Eon, the governance and access control sit at the storage layer. So I can see that I'm authorized to read that query. Let's see why. I'm here in the role of a data analyst, and I've defined a contextual access control rule that is only something that can be done in the storage layer. So an outside agent can't access my data. So this is a rule that we've defined that said, hey, this user cannot access any production data that has PHI, patient health information. So this table does not have any PHI. I can run that query, and I have that access control. So let's actually run the query. Yes, please do. And that ran the query, and I have those results. As simple as that. So I could search for my data, and I couldn't generate any query. But now let's examine the actual results. And if I look at the data, I can see that most of it is relatively fresh from the past a couple of months. But this is a backup platform. I have all of my historical data, all of my cloud snapshots. So let's see if I have some data in snapshots. this runs an AI agent that is analyzing the previous snapshots. And it has found that each of those resources has some past history and that there's some intersection between them. So in the past 6 months, I have all of the data. So let's generate a graph and see how the rejected claims have looked over time. So let's generate a graph. Let's count the number of claims. Per month over 6 months. This, let's let it think. And now it generated a graph as simple as that, directly on top of my backup. I actually don't see an interesting trend here, but I can go on and continue to run that and generate graphs, access my data. Now think of a compliance audit that asks me to give all the checks that John Doe wrote 5 years ago, and all I have to do is input here, give me all the checks that John Doe wrote 5 years ago, and I will immediately get the results. And that is a whole new level for backup and recovery, but also unlocking that asset, not only for backup, but for the entire organization, getting a huge win out of that as well. I also want to show you what we're doing with logs, because once we started to show this to additional customers, they've found additional use cases where data that was, until today, kind of locked, can be used in the backup themselves. So if we look at typical log management, you have your access logs, and you have performance logs, and you have applicative logs, and so on, audit trail, et cetera. And there are amazing tools out there that are high-end tools to analyze logs. The problem is that, on one hand, compliance requires you to store logs for a very long time, 90 days, 180 days, depending on the industry and the type of data. On the other hand, when you actually need to analyze logs, usually you will only go for the relatively fresh logs. If I have a problem today, I would usually analyze logs from yesterday, from a couple of days ago, not from 80 days ago. And those systems are extremely expensive. And as we've said, we want to cut down cost and use it to things that brings us value. And what I've been hearing from customers is they're dumping those retained logs to S3, once again, only keeping short, fresh logs in their primary log analysis tools, your SIEMs or your performance monitoring platform, and so on. But when they do need to access older logs, when need arrives, they need to ingest all of it again to that system, continue all of the retention, a lot of manual work. So let's see what we're doing with Eon. Basically, those logs from your object storage or primary logged softwares are ingested into that unified platform. And we have the tools here in our console to analyze those logs. So if I need to access an older log, I can just do that from here. So let's, filter those, see the logs in specific errors. I can have those messages here, see a lot of data on the logs themselves. But what's really interesting here is that I can also see where they came from. So I can see that these logs were picked up from an S3 bucket. They can come from multiple cloud providers. We can pull logs from your VMs, your database logs, and so on, access logs, obviously. And if I want to analyze them further, once again, I can go into my query editor and just fetch data from my logs here as well. So let's play around with that a little bit. So let's pull some logs. For my audit trail logs. Let's order those. Let's do that by the event time and limit some results. And I get immediate access to my logs, and I can run any query here. So once again, if I need to find my logs, I can do that with the same level of performance. And the challenge with those, let's say, high-end log systems is that they use very expensive and great databases like Elasticsearch, but they're very expensive, and to hold data that you need to retain for a long time require just to cruise an outrageous cost, actually, if you look at your Splunk or your other tool that you're using. And this also allows you to optimize and shift away your budget to things that bring you more value. So with that, I think that I can let's go back to the slides. And I will pass it on and so you can hear how SoFi have been leveraging Eon to get that value.
Thanks, Ron. So I think I need a banner up here that says actual customer. My goal here is I'm not a sales guy. I'm very much an engineering leader. I want to talk to you a little bit as somebody who's gone through this process from engagement all the way through implementation in recent times. Like, I think we finished roughly 3 months ago with our full deployment. So just to talk a little bit about the company, SoFi is essentially a software development company or a tech company that owns a bank. With that being said, we're highly regulated. As many of you are, OCC, FRB. We have many, many different regulators and auditors that we have to answer to. Obviously, we want to move fast. We want to enable our customers, and we want to ensure that we have uptime. A lot of what we talk about is how do we get to that 5 nines? Most of the time, that's unrealistic. One of the things that led us down this path was I had a firewall go down in one of my Amazon environments. The backup provider we used was inaccessible. We had to go through AWS to get their EC2 backups to actually restore that service. This took a process of an entire day where one of my AWS regions was not available. As part of that, I challenged my team. How do we do this better? Who can we look at? What can we do? This isn't acceptable. Yeah, we were available. We have 5 AWS regions. We're highly available. We've got disaster recovery. But I had a full region that was unavailable. That impacted my software developers. That impacted my compliance team. That impacted my cyber team. How do we get better? Again, some of the challenges that Ron had spoken to, we experienced. Like, we're fragmented across 5 AWS regions, right? Those backups only reside in each region. Those snapshots only reside in each region. We did not have cross-regional backup. Retention policies were very manual, right? My teams were having to go create retention policies based on that region and what customers we were serving out of that region. We own a bank. There's very, very specific retention policies to banks. We talked a little bit about the firewall outage. Anytime we had to make a change, we were talking about days, sometimes weeks, to make a change to whether it's the retention policy, compliance issue that came up, MRAs, if you guys are familiar with those, matters requiring attention that came up from the auditors. Like, these things took weeks, sometimes months to actually implement. One thing, the slide is great, but I want to talk a little bit more about the engagement with Eon. With Eon coming in, it wasn't just a sales pitch. They came in, they worked with us from day one. SoFi is notoriously hard to onboard vendors. They brought their team in and worked with us every single step of the way, worked with our compliance team, worked with our cyber team, got everything in place so that we could kick off our POC. All right, as part of that POC, they walked us through and worked with us side by side to identify where exactly all of our data was, how much data we were using, how much our AWS spend was. Then we were actually able to put the financials together and be like, okay, if we go with Eon, this is our AWS spend, this is how much we're spending with Eon. Now, like most of you, I'm a little skeptical when I see those numbers. I think I'm pretty positive the number we came up with was like a $9,000 a month savings. I was like, that's neat, that's great, all right? In reality, we're plus 20% of that now. So I think we're sitting at about $12,000 a month of savings. So we've blown past their estimations and are continuing to grow. right? So the more we grow, the more we bring into the environment in our 5 AWS regions, the more we're actually saving. So they're not just giving you the sales pitch, they're actually working with you side by side, identifying where the cost-saving measures are and where these technologies are actually helping you implement the things that you need and identify your issues and how to resolve those issues. With that, we got through the POC. Everything was great. We're seeing the cost savings. We were able to, with Eon working side by side with us, roll out to our entire environment across 5 regions in a matter of weeks, right? Generally, that's unheard of for a company like ours, probably like yours. I mean, just the software development lifecycle takes weeks, if not months, per region, right? Going through SDLC, your lower environments, getting up into production, it's a long, drawn-out process. With Eon working side by side with us, we were able to do that for 5 regions in approximately 2 weeks, right? With the added benefit, I might add, Ron talked about this a little bit, of the data classification, which was a brand new thing for us, as well as my cyber security team doing cartwheels because of the ransomware protection. I know Ron didn't talk about it a lot, but if you bring your cybersecurity team in, they will be very happy to have the conversation around ransomware protection. I'm positive. We talked about the rollout, but one of the things that I think impressed me the most, and he showed you the dashboard, and my manager is here that I referenced here, I had an unknown regulation around student loans, right? Obviously, SoFi is known. We started out with student loans. That's where we made our hay. But there was a regulation out of New York City that I wasn't aware of. We own a bank. I've got a 7-year retention policy. As we were insourcing that infrastructure into the corporate infrastructure, I came across an unknown regulation working with my compliance team where I needed to keep all of that student loan information, regardless if it was SoFi or Golden Pacific Bank, the bank that we own, for 10 years, right? We had to make this change very quickly in order to stay within compliance. I called my manager. I said, I made a boo-boo. We need to fix this very quickly. Told her what we needed to do. She literally had made the change before I hung up the phone. That would have taken us weeks previously. She was able to make the change in real time, get us back within compliance, be able to evidence that change for our compliance officer before we actually hung up the phone. That, if nothing else, is a testament to how quick, easy, and versatile that the product is. Just talking about some of the results. I talked about the cost, right? They underplayed the cost savings by quite a bit when they talked to us. Like, the cost savings is in perpetuity. Like, that is AWS spend that I'm putting somewhere else now. The operational burden is almost non-existent, right? This is all in software for us. It all runs through our SDLC pipeline. My team is not having to go maintain this. We're not having to, we build the policy, we deploy it, we tag the services that need to be involved, and let it go. Talked about the ransomware protection. I can't talk about that nearly enough. My cybersecurity team is very happy with this. And then it's 100% automated from our end. Like, it is built into all of our builds as we build them. And as we continue to move forward, as we continue to expand, as we will, we're in 5 regions now, probably 7 by the end of the year. This is all built into our software deployment pipeline. What's next for us? We're continuing to look at how do we build these analytics into everything that we do. So that's the integration of the Eon data that we were just speaking about with my SRE team. That's starting to build policies around the data classification that we've got. My engineering team has started looking at, I think, Ron, you spoke specifically to PII and PCI data.
Yeah.
We own many PII and PCI environments. We're looking at now how do we contextualize that for our compliance officer and our risk teams to go in and be able to look at that from an evidencing perspective. Again, reducing the operational burden on my engineering teams. And then again, taking that to the next level, and this is something that is near and dear to my heart, is self-service compliance. Is how do I take that, turn that evidence, like anytime we make a change through an MR or whatever, how do I automate that evidence so that my engineers don't have to be randomized anymore? We can just go auditor, internal audit, one load, two load. Here's where the repository is, where all this data is, or here is the query that you run, go get your evidence. Again, reducing the operational burden on my engineering teams. All right, Ron, I'll hand it back off to you, man.
Yeah, thank you so much. And first of all, I want to encourage all of you to come over to the booth. We have a very neat booth and where you can see additional demos, dive into the specific use cases that are most interesting to you. So please come over, booth 529. And I think that now we can go on and have a quick Q&A if anyone has any questions.